Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I can't seem to get out of Iceland. I'm okay. I like it here. Nice people, great culture, treating me
Nice,
well.
nice people, nice culture, but you know you're going to be stuck there for at least another 2 weeks, so get used to it.
I
Put
was
your
so too.
put your puffer jacket on here.
I have this beautiful shot of Germany we haven't been able to use yet. That'll come soon.
Right.
Um, 71-2A. You need to know, everybody needs to know that like a hole in the head, but this is where we're in. We're going in still in the making a decision part of the Agentic AI board discussion that we're having. And this is the second topic, the second time we've gone over the point about making a decision.
Correct.
And why are we doing that? The reason we're doing it is this. You always, as somebody who's running a company or leading anything, you have what I call a risk time equation, right? How much risk are you dealing with versus how much time do you have to deal with it? And frequently, you don't have time to deal with it in the way you'd like to deal with it, meaning to get all the input you need, have the time to make the decision, get all the advice you want. And when you don't have time, you try to do at least what we did in the first of these video series. In this particular, 71 2A, the first part of this, decide. Use the radar screen to take your input, take the assess questions. What am I missing? What are the motivations? How much time do I have? Is it my friend or my enemy? And then move quickly to, all right, let me just go down quickly in my mind and figure out what are my responsibilities to lead in this case and how am I doing against them? Because those three together, and if you're really stuck, just go with the three questions, right?
Right.
Or if you don't have anything by then, you've built your instincts up, you should be able to go right then, right? But there are plenty of times when the risk is big and you have the time. Time is your friend. And I think you and I would use branding, rebranding as an example, Deirdre, right?
Yes.
I mean, we use the example of you've got Cracker Barrel, you've got Jaguar, who, I mean, some of the statistics you and I saw about Jaguar and the loss of sales they took by their rebranding effort were staggering.
Correct.
There's a case of where you have the time and you should take it, and meaning you should go one step deeper. And so this video is about when you have that time, when that risk time equation is in your favor, take the time. So what does that mean beyond what we covered last time? And we're going to cover that today. That's the purpose behind this video. So with that said, I'm now going to turn that over to you, Deirdre, and let you kick off how we're going to deal with this today.
All right. You mentioned the radar screen. That's actually our starting point again today, because the radar screen contains a number of the tools that are very appropriate for CEOs and board chairs, the people in this whole scenario in this stream of videos, to use when making decisions, when having conversations, when deciding on the whole context of it. The radar screen is exactly what you imagine as a radar screen, a green ground. And we put on this a number of the tools that all leaders need to look at, think about, be reminded about as they go about their daily work. Last time we talked about uh, some of those tools. We're going to go now into more tools this time, that what I'll call the going deeper tools. Now, the radar screen itself is context because the radar screen, an airplane's radar screen changes depending on whether you're flying into New York or flying into Los Angeles. So the radar screen changes depending on the situation you're facing. And that's what we're talking about here. How do you stay aware of your context? How do you build your mindset based on the input you get from the radar screen? so that you can then use your mindset to evaluate, assess, and make decisions. So the tools we have on our radar screen at all times, and in any particular situation, you may bring in more tools, but these are the basic ones, the permanent ones, are you yourself, your characteristics, your responsibilities as a leader. That's a better way to say it. The basic assess questions. What am I missing? What are the motivations? And is time my friend or enemy? Then we get into the whole question of strategy, or rather vision, mission, strategy. That's the organization counterpart to the leadership responsibilities. And then we have our leadership and management model, in which we take the strategy and execute it. As you and I have said multiple times, Tom, you can't have a strategy without execution. Execution and strategy are tied together. Or a better way to put it is you can't just go and start executing without a strategy in place like that. But all of these tools point down to perhaps the most important tool, and that's where we're starting. That's value exchange. Now, you and I have talked about value exchange. I think we've actually filmed a video on it several months ago. But let's go over it here because it is so critical. And it's when you have the time to do a full value exchange analysis, you can get everything else right, or more appropriate, or closer to what you need to be doing. You may not have the time to do this full analysis if you have to respond in 2 hours, what you were talking about, an emergency situation. But let's start talking about this. Now, many people have heard about the term value proposition. That's our starting point for value exchange. And its value proposition is generally talked about as the value of the product or service that a company puts into a marketplace. Now, you and I disagree immediately because we say it's not the value, it doesn't rest with the company, it rests with the marketplace. Does the marketplace perceive that your value proposition is valid? Because that's the basis of the value exchange. And you and I have taught so many students and worked with so many clients, Tom, who insist that their perception of value is the right one. And we have to spend a lot of time talking with them about how it's the marketplace that perceives value. And your test of the perception of value is the exchange. In a very simple way, I put a product into the marketplace, a customer perceives value and gives me money in exchange. We actually call that an opportunity exchange, where someone gives you money for a product or service you put in the marketplace. But it goes beyond that because companies are more than just revenue themselves. We also talk about an investment value exchange, and that has to do with the decisions of the leaders in the company. A decision has to be made, for example, to invest money in building this product, which you think will have value in the marketplace, or to raise capital to set up a new factory, or to take some other action. And it is when you see a return in the marketplace from that commentary, revenue, some other form of return. This is what we call basic ROI. It's the return on investment, that you say that you have an investment value exchange. This is actually more involved, complicated, and important than most people think. It's a way of thinking about, should you invest money in a particular opportunity? Should you go out and raise capital because you can perceive that there would be an ROI on this? And then there's a third type of value exchange we talk about, which is the institutional and leadership value exchange. Companies have reputations. Companies' leadership have reputations. Companies' actions have reputations, and all of these have value in the marketplace. If a company pursues certain charitable work, the marketplace will perceive it more favorably. If a leader takes certain actions or writes a new book or does something that attracts the attention of the marketplace, that's a leadership value exchange. And the reason that this one is important is it gives a company or an organization the ability to operate and to act in ways it might not have if it were not perceived so favorably in the marketplace. So you have these three types of value exchange, and any leader will know what the value exchanges for the organization are. This is basic. The point here, and why it's so important when we're dealing with the implementation of new technologies, and particularly moving into AI and AI agents and the other tools we're talking about now, is that your value exchanges will change, that you cannot assume that you have the same value exchange in the marketplace. For example, your path to revenue may be different. Um, your ability to raise money may be different. Right now, a lot of money is being thrown at artificial intelligence projects, but can you get a return on them? That's starting to be a big question out there. Do you really have a strategy about these? So we'll give you the money, but can you get a return on it and therefore pay us back for this exchange? But then also the whole institution and leadership value exchange becomes very important. Well, for example, a lot of people hate chatbots, which are a form of artificial intelligence. A lot of people dislike the tech companies who are providing the AI tools because they're not taking care of their customer base by providing protections for children, by limiting hallucinations and so forth. So there are a lot of issues here in relation to this institutional and leadership value exchange. But by and large, when you're making decisions, when you as a leader are making decisions to pursue actions into using these tools, your perception of the value exchange you will have will drive the decisions you make, because how you set your strategy, how you set your execution will, even more than normal, determine how the marketplace reacts to what you do, to how you implement these tools. And that's why we say that value exchange is so important here. And it's going down a level because people reacting quickly will just react in terms of tools and execution. They won't react in terms of strategy, value, return, and the things that really make a great company. Tom, let me pause for a second and ask if you want to say anything about value before I move on.
I like the way you frame it, that the mindset of the CEO is contextual,
Correct.
and that to us, mindset is a result of something. And it's the result of two things: that you've, one, perceived the context properly, which is the reason why you chose a radar screen to represent this, because it's a way to be able to see uh, the full picture outside, and to be able to then pull in those inputs, and then that you've got various tools available to you in the radar screen, which is what a true radar operator has, that can highlight certain things and show the different levels and all this. We think of it the same way. We're providing you some tools. You can choose to use whichever one you think fits the context yourself. But that's the second part of your responsibility as a leader, is not only to view that context properly, but it's to prepare yourself well, right?
Right.
So that you have those tools in your mind or in your hand, or you can remember, oh, there's something I can remember. You've got some of these, and we're not wedded to any one particular one. We're giving you options that you can possibly use to help you. We may be saying, under ideal circumstances, these would be the ones I'd use. Value exchange is critical, though, because you and I see value exchange as like the opposite end of the radar screen.
Right.
It is when you're in doing anything, providing anything for somebody, you are looking for some return for that. That's human nature. Now, that return may be just purely self-generated,
Right.
right? I go out to the community and I do things, and I do them anonymously because I don't want to be recognized. My value, the exchange I'm getting for that, is the satisfaction when I get home. I've done really good work. I know I have, and I'm happy that I'm able to contribute and be able to do that. I've got
Right.
the freedom and the capability of doing it. It's a wonderful feeling. I know you spend more time on that than I do, actually. But I wish I
A
should
lot
spend
of
more, Deirdre.
volunteer hours. Yes.
But 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 that's value exchange. So there's a perfectly good value exchange. If you get out of it what you want, or you get more out of it than you give, that's wonderful, right? It really is. And so it's not so much a monetary exchange. That's why we don't like to be as black and white of, well, value exchange is how much money do I get for what I'm doing? Of course, that is a legitimate value exchange. Most every business we know that's commercial, that's what you do. That's your objective, right? And not to lose sight of that, that it is truly an exchange. Now, I think you'd say that when you think about that exchange, though, even when you're a company that is really money focused, there's other parts of that value exchange you want that are not hard, right? Meaning they're not money. I kind of like loyalty, meaning I kind of like to know they'll come back to me, right?
Right.
Amazon really tries to build that in. Is I'm not going to give you the absolute lowest price, but I'm going to make buying so convenient from me that, and I'll put all kinds of conditions in there that'll help you just decide, you know what, rather than go seek something, I can just order it and it'll be at my doorstep between 4 and 6, I think the next morning here in Phoenix, if you order a certain amount of money, certain price, and it's available. You can have it. I can order it before midnight and it's going to be at my doorstep between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. It's nuts. It's nuts. So if I'm sitting at home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, do I go to the pharmacy and buy that stuff or can I have it delivered? So that's a value, that's part of the value exchange. Now, is that monetary? Not in the transaction necessarily, but it's really monetary in the fact that I am now a customer that continues to rely on that, keep coming back. So that's value exchange when as you and I think about it, Deirdre, it's a really complex thing. You and I would say value exchange is the goal, it's the end result. What am I trying to achieve ultimately? And then it's hard and soft. It's got monetary components and it has non-monetary components. And we even make the distinction that two other aspects of this, then I'll promise I'll quit because I know you like the thumbnails we do that says you're stuck on the theory side and I'm on the what is it, theory and reality? Is that the one you
Reality
like?
side.
Yeah,
Yes.
you like those. Okay, I like them too. Um, but the point about value exchange here is that it's it that the not-for-profit world still has to worry about the money part, but we call it an indirect monetization. You're doing good work, that's your goal, and hopefully it's visible. And you need it visible enough that you can then demonstrate that equation of I'm doing this in the community, or I'm doing wherever your value exchange, wherever your service is, and I'm getting this back. And you can then go to the third party and say, look at the good I'm doing. Would you be willing to provide me the monetary base I need to be able to continue this? And we call that indirect monetization rather than direct. It's still a value exchange. It's more complicated, it's more nuanced, but it is a value exchange. And so I wanted to take a moment just and talk about that because the reason why we are spending time on this way is it is the most, you and I would say, second only to observing the outside properly. It's the second most important thing you do is to make sure that you've thought your way through this. Now, we'll take scenarios apart in, the university portion of this, which is the third series in this, but where we'll go through the tools individually. And you as a CEO don't necessarily need to be watching those videos because you already know what we're talking about. This hopefully resonates with you, and then you can just get it in your head. But those of you that haven't really studied that very deeply or would like to go more, we'll have a session where we'll go through it and we'll give case studies and so forth and go through it in detail. But that's the point. And Deirdre, when we think about the exchange of value, that exchange can look much like the hierarchy of needs that people have converted Maslow into. It's just that the triangle, right? Which was not his of origin, it was somebody else's. But that concept of the hierarchy of needs, that your return, what you're exchanging, that could be anywhere on that hierarchy, all the way up through self-actualization, which is I anonymously do good work and I am self-actualized by that. It's a feeling of self-actualization. So back to the reality.
Back to reality. Um, but a number of great points in there, Tom, which I'm going to pick up on. That remember that the radar screen is contextual, so that value exchange sitting on the radar screen is also contextual. So that if you have a company that is operating in a certain way and you decide to pick up the use of one of these emerging technologies like AI agents, your value exchange is going to change. It necessarily must because all of the parts of your business environment may depend on how you operate, how you execute. Your customers may have to buy from you in different ways. They may get information in different ways. They may find that they don't like these different ways of doing things. Or alternatively, they may start to expect. And now we're getting to Maslow, back to Maslow's hierarchy. It may be an expectation, bottom level, that you are using AI chatbots. And without them, people are going to say, where's this company? But on the other hand, if you operate at a high level with chatbots, people might say, no, this is too personal information. I need to talk to a person here. So you have to think through the value that you're providing in multiple ways to your customers, to your marketplace, internally, to how you do business internally. Uh, and the reason that is so important is that that determines your strategy and your approach. And we'll get into this more as we continue throughout this session. What it really drives, though, is your answer to the organization structure questions. Now, you're familiar with these questions. We've talked about the assessment ones. The what am I missing? What are the motivations? And am I aligned with them? And is time my friend or enemy? We'll put aside the time one because you've covered that, Tom. But the question, what am I missing changes when you're talking about adopting a new technology? Which form of the new technology? Which model? What outputs? How will people react? Will I have to change my supply chain, my interactions on my platforms, my interactions with customers? All of this feeds into strategy and also the finances of the company, but certainly more into strategy right now. So this has to be factored into your plans. What are the motivations here? We've said, you and I have said multiple times, Tom, that too many people are just going into the use of various technologies simply to do so. Someone in the business press says they have to do so. So someone says, okay, get out there and install an AI agent without having done the thinking about it, without having done the thinking about value exchange or strategy or all the other business aspects that you have to think about. So, what are the motivations here? The motivations of the business press are likely not aligned with the motivations of every CEO out there. Similarly, we know that the motivations of the large tech companies are not aligned with individual businesses, however much they may assert that they are. So you have to keep this in mind when you're not only making decisions to adopt the tools generally, but also which tools specifically to adopt. As you and I have discussed many times, Tom, the various AI tools are different and have different training, different outputs, different uses, and so forth. But then once we get through the assess questions, assess through the lens of value exchange now we get to the next set of organizing structure questions, which are the decide questions. And this is where it gets very interesting because remember what this whole scenario is. We've had a CEO and a board director discussing one, whether their organization is prepared to adopt the use of AI? And then two, do they have to prepare the organization because the use of AI is essential here? So we're really talking about that later one. And we're talking about how do you develop the plans to prepare your organization to adopt AI? So the decision questions are, what resources do I have? What outcomes do I want and can expect? And then what's the plan? The resources question is very interesting because obviously that has to change as the value exchange changes, depending on how you're going to use these tools, whether you're going to use them and how you're going to use them. You may have the resources for some basic AI, some robots in your factory, some automation in the back offices, but now we're talking about a different use of AI and different processes and the different impact of the use of AI on everything in the organization. So, do you have the resources for this? Do you have the people you need? Do you have to train the people? Do you need new people? Do you, as the CEO in this scenario has come to conclude, do you need a high level hire like a real CTO to drive the strategic implementation of this strategy? So maybe you had the resources, but you no longer have the resources. And obviously that fits into strategy execution and the decisions you make about how you're going to implement the AI. What outcomes do I want and can expect? That's actually more complicated. I keep saying that it's more complicated. It's all more complicated, Tom. But this outcome question is truly essential here because you and I talk about how all activity of any organization, for profit, not for profit, must deliver the results it says it's going to deliver. You know, in a business, it's usually a profit, a level of profit, or a level of activity, or certain other, like growth in this direction, expansion internationally, and so forth. For a not-for-profit, it could be serving this many needy people, or saving this wetland, or creating a legislative analysis for the state legislature, or something like that. You have to deliver on a result and get be able to articulate the result you get from this activity. So what outcome do I want and can expect, not just as business operations, but as business operations in the light of the adoption of some form of AI? Whether it's LLMs, whether it's AI agents, whether it's individual AI agents in a couple of key places, or whether you go to a whole AI agent architecture, and what would you expect from that? Because the results you expect drive the strategy you create. Starting with the whole concept of outcome, is your organization ready to use these new technologies to drive a result? It may be that you too have to do some preparing of your organization because you can even think before you can even think about the type of AI that you will bring in or the type of AI agents you will bring in and in what structure. And then let's say you do something like use an AI agent to take over this particular process. What result do you want from that? Is it simply greater productivity? Or do you want to have greater interaction between A process and B process? Or do you want something else in there, reduction of staff in a certain area? Whatever your result is, you need to be able to deliver that by your strategic use of the form of AI you adopt. And simply because of the way AI works, you will likely have multiple results that you want across multiple processes, across multiple, I was about to say silos. Actually, the more you use AI, there are fewer silos in the organization, across departments in an organization, and so forth. You need to be able to articulate this and also set out the measurement of that result. Now, results are fine, but as you know, Tom, you need to have a specific metric or a specific non-metrical measurement that tells you whether you've actually achieved the outcome. And you can prove to people, like a querulous board of directors, that you have achieved this outcome by use of this form of AI. And then it comes down to what's the plan? Now, in our scenario, and this is in video 1B 71-1B, both the board chair and the CEO came back with plans for translating the organization into a state of readiness to adopt AI. This is short of developing the organization strategy. It's in thinking through what you need to use AI, in thinking through strategic initiatives, in making sure that your people get the training they need, that the conversation is there, and that the resources are there so that everything lines up. You have the resources, you know what outcomes you want, and then you're ready to go beyond the plan for readiness into then developing the strategy, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So this is why these questions are so important, that your answers to them change when your value exchange changes, because everything you need to answer those questions is going to be different. So let me stop again, Tom, and give you a chance, before I move on to the strategy part of this, give you a chance to weigh in on these questions.
There, when you think about AI, I think about you and I are always trying to simplify this for people to be able to think about it in a way that's useful. Um, and I think that there, I think today it's helpful to think about AI implementations, regardless of the architecture, whether you're using whatever you're using, right? Learning models or your LLMs rather, or uh, chatbot versions, or you're using agentic AI architecture with those kind of agents, right? AI agent delivery. I think it's helpful to think about AI in three different ways, three different categories, at least for me. One is just automation. It's advanced automation. So it is helpful because it helps improve automation in significant ways. And by the way, these can all be mixed and used together, right? But automation, and you'll find that a lot of the AI implementations traditionally have been and continue to be automation. And you and I would think of normal people's use of AI today is basically automation, having it answer questions for me in a more complete way than me going to the library and doing the research or me getting online and doing the research, right? So I'm advancing this in a way. There's a second one that is the reasoning aspect of this, where it takes and can reason through something, where it can solve a mathematical problem that's difficult for humans even to solve because of its speed required or the amount of context you have to bring into it at one time. Or to be able to synthesize. Some models, especially in the area, some of the more advanced models now do an incredibly good job of synthesizing information. Humans can do that. It just takes a lot longer.
Mhm.
Um, and and maybe not as completely. But again, there's so much learned bias by the models and constantly changing bias by the models, meaning bias meaning the way it answers the question, not whether it's
Right.
good or bad, right? But bias meaning in the way it answers the question that can be a problem. And you and I discover it daily. We were working on something yesterday where we saw the answer changing, and we're not sure. We think the first answer was most always right in that particular case. Um, and then there are inference models, meaning it's presented with information and it then makes a decision on what to do, right?
Right.
Now that is a whole nother game. And that's what gets people confused and probably a lot of people don't like, right? Is it's making a decision that in some people's hands might not be that decision, or they
Right.
don't like the interface. They don't like that. They would prefer that to be more of a human that they can read body language and they can see whether humans are just not used to a lot of the way that inference models are delivered yet.
Mhm.
And a lot of it has to do with comfort in understanding the model and knowing the model.
Mhm.
As a result, so let me now take this back to uh, the the problem we're dealing with here, which is when you and I were going through this whole section that we're talking about is okay, so how did you and I come up with a plan that we were going to deliver, right? And you said, well, look, before you even know how to do that, you got to think about the value exchange because
Right.
it's going to play in here all along in everything we do in the future. So we had to introduce that concept. But now it's back to, okay, the organization structure. When you're trying to do this, the first thing you do is ask yourself those three questions. What am I missing? What are the motivations of all the people involved? And in this particular case, you're missing a lot. You can
Correct.
know that there is a lot of confusion both in the marketplace and within your company. You can almost guess that, but you found that out by starting to talk to the senior team and also to talk to the board. And then thirdly, you saw different people have different motivations. And
Correct.
this is the point about fit,
Yes.
right? So when you're sitting there as the CEO saying, all right, what am I missing and all this? And now I'm going through the decide questions. You start with, okay, what resources do I have and what do I need? And you're starting to ask the question, well, do all these people really fit what I'm trying to get done? Or does my company fit it? Or do my resources fit it? Meaning, not just your people resources, but your infrastructure, your ability to execute, the amount of time you have, the amount of freedom you have to be able to change things. Meaning, do I even have the bandwidth of the people in getting the work done to do the change? And if I did, how would I do it? So there are all those kinds of questions that have to be thought about. But I think what you and I ended up doing is we triaged all that, both at the board level and at the company level. And I can tell by your expression, Deirdre, you're saying, uh-oh, is he going off into left field again on me? Yeah, I can see, uh-oh, is he going off into that cold winter scene?
It's just that there's so much to say on this
Oh,
topic.
there really is.
Because
I,
again, it circles back to the quality of the people involved in making these decisions.
it
But go
does. And
ahead.
that's where we ended
Go
up,
ahead.
right? We ended up at
Yeah.
that. Just coming back to, look, when it comes down to it, regardless of whether it might change in a year or 5 years, right now, we're a human-centered company, meaning it's primarily humans that are executing what we do in our company. So I'm going to take it back to the personal responsibility and say, in that company, it's still being led by humans. And in that board, it's still being led by humans. Um, and as a result, we're dealing with this moment. How do we deal with this moment? And it's a human responsibility. And you and I know enough about this subject. We don't know a lot about a lot of things, but we do know enough about AI from the user point of view at the commercial level,
Right.
building companies, at least tech companies, which is what we're really familiar with, that you need to know this stuff internally. You have to have an
Yes.
internal sense about this technology. Just like back when the internet was introduced to most people that are watching us don't remember when it was introduced because you may not have even been born or even concepted that idea at that point. But when the internet was introduced, it was pretty clear you needed to really understand this because it was going to have a long-term dramatic effect. The same thing with computing. When the
Right.
concept of moving from analog to digital occurred, people really had to get into it to truly understand the effect. Those that were never able to do that quickly enough were left behind in both of those scenarios. You and I witnessed it in both, and we're going to witness it now. Those
Right.
who cannot internalize this and don't understand it at a basic level, meaning they don't internally get it, and just automation is not enough. Using it like a Google search is not enough, an
Hmm.
advanced Google search. You have to truly know its power, meaning you've gotten into the reasoning, you've gotten into the inference, and you know how to make the model do it for you.
Right.
And we yesterday were dealing with automation, reasoning, and influence, right? And I dealt with it again last night in something that you and I were waiting to happen. So And this is just you and I using the tools together, right, on Zoom.
Using the tools and listening to you, I'm saying this is operating at the level of tools. And remember, much of the conversation about this is at the level of tools or
Mhm.
which model and so forth. When you're talking about instincts, guts, if you want to put it fairly crudely, the internal aspect of it, then you're talking about the translation from the tools to business. And that's where we're really trying to focus in terms of getting people to think and understand about how these tools are affecting how you're making business decisions.
Absolutely. Take the example of yesterday. During this, something came up, and we said we need to do some research on this. So after we broke off our call, I went and did the research. I sent it to you. You went out and looked at it, and your answer back was, look, they've really made major strides. But it's in major strides in automating
Right,
using AI models, probably at the automation side, maybe a little bit of the learning stuff.
right.
Um, and is it going to make the ultimate job easier to do and quicker to accomplish and way cheaper?
By magnitudes,
But
yes.
what was the other thing you said? It's going to introduce a little bit of complication until you figure it out.
That's correct, because we had learned a process and now we're going to have to adjust our thinking to the new process. It's not that hard, but you have to acknowledge when you're running a business that your workers will have to adjust to a new process, and that adjustment may affect other processes out there or the timing of other processes, at least in the interim.
And so when we were thinking about this specific problem, AI agent implementation, which you and I really took from moving companies' use from an automation point of view, advanced, moving it into the use of reasoning models and inference models in its business, which is a different game. That
Right,
means that the leaders, and we think not only the leadership team, but also the oversight team, has to have this inside internalized. And that's why it drove us to say the outcome we want is all the people that are leading or overseeing this business have internalized what AI can do, how it can be used, how who is best to use it, and how do you make sure you're using it in a responsible way, right?
correct.
And that's why we came up with the plans that we did, which in both of our cases was to educate, to give people the chance, give them the time, the freedom to say, we don't expect coming in this door, you're going to do this. It's like our old financial modeling courses, right? We
Right,
don't expect you to walk in the door and do this. We expect you to do it when you leave.
right,
And we'll give you that bridge. And financial modeling is the same concept as here as this. It is if you don't know how to model your business and not finance, we call it financial modeling. It's truly business modeling, right?
correct.
Meaning all aspects of your business. If you cannot lay that out and create a process for modeling that and convert that into numbers and make it work, then you don't understand all the aspects of your business. And it's only when you've done that can you prove to yourself you've understood all the aspects of the business. The same here. If you don't know how to use these models all the way through the inference models, it's hard for you to envision what it's going to take for the company that you're leading or the group you're leading to be able to stay competitive and to not only stay competitive but lead in this game. And we have a belief that this goes back to not just the leadership team, it goes back to people in school this very moment using
Correct.
these in a similar way. Um, I have done enough on that. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Deirdre, to move on because we have another one to do before we keep going here. But I know you want to finish up this whole concept of the organization structure to get your plan in place.
It's just there's just so much to talk about in all of these tools that we're using. That we will be coming back to these. Let's put it that way.
Deirdre, another point you made, and I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but this really has hit me hard recently. I think, I hate to say this, but I think we're going to have to come back to finding a way to make sure that when you're dealing with plans and you're dealing with execution, you know how you said a minute ago, rightfully so,
Right,
that ultimately you need a strategy and then you need a plan. Now, in a second, I'm going to turn it back to you and you're going to go through, wait a minute, no, you need a vision, mission, and strategy, and I'll take you through
right,
what those are. So we'll deal with what they are in a minute, but you need both. You need a strategy and a plan.
right,
And essentially, just very quickly, an approach is your strategy is an approach. It's how are you
right,
going to approach something, and the
right,
plan is the actual execution of that specific approach. Okay, we have got to do around the world. We have got to do a better card, a better job of scorecarding results, meaning of saying, all right, here's exactly what we intend to accomplish, and here's how we're going to track it and measure it. We're reaching into a territory now where we have so much information and so much data available to us ad infinitum that we're losing sight of the forest for the trees. I can
sure,
see this, we're seeing it politically, where we're just losing sight of, and I say politically, I mean geopolitically, we're losing sight of, wait a minute, is this better? Is it worse? What were we trying to accomplish? What we are not trying to accomplish? And you and I deal with many, many issues that are not just business issues. And it's just becoming apparent to me that we're losing focus on we're seeing that we're accomplishing certain things, but how does it really help meet the actual end result? And this is was your point about, look, it's about the value exchange. I intend to put resources to achieve a result, and then I expect to get an exchange in return, hard or soft, depending on what my objective is.
right.
We're not doing a good enough job with describing the end result value exchange. How did we do on that value exchange versus where we intended? So I think one thing that you and I are going to focus on, and I didn't mean to throw you a problem to answer here, I'm just going to answer my own question. We have to do a better job of this. We think there's another thing that has to change. Part of what you and I do is we're observing all the things that we've learned over the years, which between the two of us, and I realize I have more years than you do, but combined, we have plenty of that, good and bad, in our background, seeing good and bad. There are some tools that just need to be brought back in a certain way to use, and some need to be abandoned, right? Because they don't fit going forward. I think one that fits going forward is trying to figure out how do you scorecard results better against your expectations.
There are actually, and I'm only going to spend a minute or two on this because it tends to be what I'll call a classroom type discussion. There's a lot of talk right now about what metrics people are using to assess progress, assess results in business right now. The standard financial metrics likely do not apply in the age of technology, in the digital age. So people have to come up with new ones, and then there has to be agreement that these are valid. It's a big problem right now. And I think the problem's only going to get worse when you get into the broad use of LLMs and AI agents and AI agent architecture and so forth. One of the problems, and I'll just throw this out before going on, is that you have to make sure you're measuring the correct thing. For example, you may put in an AI agent which makes a process run more quickly, but does that process in itself running more quickly affect the profitability, if that's the result you want, of the organization. It may be that that increase in speed in this one process throws the other processes off. So there's no more productivity. There's nothing fast about the whole thing. So you have to make sure that you're measuring for the results you want as opposed to individual metrics that may or may not have value in terms of results. Obviously, you have to keep an eye on each individual process, but you have to understand when each of those measurements has validity for what. But
Yes,
that's a whole other question.
absolutely. And you and I have a process we've implemented, and some businesses are following this really religiously, that everybody has a cycle of output.
Right.
Some production output is in microseconds, and some production output is months or even years in its results. And you have to be able to know how to measure under those conditions. How do you measure under those different result cycles?
Hmm.
Meaning, if I'm selling aircraft to an airline, that may have a year or more, it has more than a year, cycle time for actually selling versus the beginning of that sell process of actually getting a signed contract and even getting money flowing. That's a huge cycle difference. And there are others that occur by the
Hmm.
moment, meaning a lot of the e-commerce is by the moment. I'm producing something, or I mean, I'm making something available, boom, somebody buys it right away. So sometimes that cycle is very different. You have to be able to measure to that and not mix those cycles up of that and be very aware of that. And that cycle right there can change, right? And that's what you're talking about here. It may be this whole concept of indirect. I may have improved that cycle, but then I ruin something else because I've now done that out of sequence with the organization.
Right.
The example that I would use is perhaps this, Deirdre, is that one of the things that I like, and then you know I've used, and I used it for a very long time, and I used to make it public to a lot of people, and I stopped doing making it public, even though I still do it. What did I accomplish last week? Right? Write it down. Why? Because I was having to do it for something else I was doing right for the first part of this year. But then I got back to it and I was using it and I was still using it. I'm still using it today for myself, though.
Right.
Why am I not getting away from it? No, I'm going to be incorporating it in, scorecarding it against my 9 basic objectives that I'm trying to achieve. I'm having to now fit it into that because what I really care about is not just that I accomplished these things, but then when I look at that picture of how does it affect this and these nine, which may be this five strategic initiatives you're driving toward, right? That I'm not linking it. I'm executing, and I'm making real progress, and I'm maneuvering with the marketplace and maneuvering with what's going on. But the benefit of good strategic planning is to be able to have a vision, right?
Right.
And come back. So that should lead. So that's a problem you and I are going to be working on. We will be working on as part of the work we're doing is how can you rethink that way of scoring quick results and accomplishment with the longer term objectives. And this is leading into the third part of this video, which is timely, right? Where I want to get you on now, Deirdre, to the whole point of the vision and mission and strategy. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, remember what we've done. We started by thinking through our value exchange, which likely led us to change how we are getting value back from the marketplace. And that it then was reflected into our organizing structure questions, what am I missing, what are the motivations, and so forth, down to do I have the resources, what outcomes do I want, and what's the plan. So now we're at the point, and this is still a process from value exchange when we're talking about the vision, mission, and strategy of an organization. Now, all organizations should have these three things. It is my guess that the vision will not change with the implementation of AI because the vision is, in effect, where you're going. what the outcome is, in that, in a very broad sense, where you're going with this whole thing. Mission likely changes because mission is how you achieve the vision, how you achieve that outcome. And if you start to think of yourself, I guess I should take a step back and say that these AI technologies can become all encompassing for organizations. They change the whole operations. They change how you think about yourself as an organization. Do you remember, Tom, about 10 or 15 years ago when all entities were saying, we're not a hospital, we're a tech company
Right.
that treats patients, or we're a tech company that does investment banking or whatever. It's the same sort of change that either we are an AI-based company or we're not one. And your decision of whether or not is part of what we're addressing right here. But if you say, look, we're going in this full speed ahead and we're developing a full AI agent architecture to drive all of the processes in the organization, that changes your mission, how you're going to achieve your outcome. I assume, by the way, that the leader sees that making this change, becoming this full AI agent architecture organization, is appropriate for better realizing the vision. That's this whole other question that we've been saying, that we've been talking about is, are you just doing this as a follower, or are you doing this as a leader here? As a leader doing the best by your organization. So remember that it may be that you say, we're going full speed ahead into creating a whole architecture and do this, this, and this. Can we still achieve our vision? If you can't, then you've got to rethink how you're adopting AI. And that's a cycle of thinking I'm not necessarily seeing all the time. This is the question of what are the motivations here? Is it the business press telling me I've got to do this full architecture? Well, are they thinking through what my vision is? No, I, as the CEO, am responsible for the vision. But once you have your vision and your mission confirmed, then you get to your strategy. As you said maybe 10 minutes ago, your strategy is your approach. How you are going to deliver on the mission, which in turn delivers on the vision. You will have strategic initiatives. You will have analyses of the marketplace. You will have goals. You will look at risks. You will look at opportunities, all of these various things. And I'm just throwing these out. I'm not doing a formal strategic process here, although we'll get to that, Tom. We will get to that. But all of those aspects of strategy change once, depending on how your value exchange drives how you answer the questions. Let's take the question of risk. I mean, that you started this by talking about the risk time factor here. Even if it's not a risk to wait, to make time your friend and not your enemy, you are still going to have fearsome risks in the adoption of AI. Are you prepared to deal with them? Do they affect your strategy? I mean, let's take a basic one, your use of data. What does your strategy say about your organization's use of data? Where's the risk involved in that? And if the risk gets too high, if too many customers object, what does that do to your ability to execute your strategy or your use of AI or your training of your LLMs or however you are going to plan to use your data? So that's why we started with something as simple, I was about to say, as simple as value exchange. There's nothing simple about value exchange, as basic as value exchange is to an organization, because we're making the point not only that a value exchange analysis itself is critical, but any decisions you make along the line affect everything else. That was true about business 500 years ago. It is 100 times more true about business these days because of the added complexity, not only of the businesses themselves, but also of the economic environment surrounding all business here. So that's why that's still important. And we have one more tool on our radar screen. Remember, we have our radar screen with the mindset and the leadership responsibilities and the questions and the vision, mission, strategy, all pointing down to value exchange. But we've jumped over the leadership and management model. Now, we've done videos on this, and we'll come back to this further in the 71-3 videos because this is a very important tool. I'll bring it in here because this is an important part of this stream from value exchange. We said it in this video, and we've said it multiple times, that you cannot execute unless you have a strategy. You can't just roll up your sleeve, download an agent, put it in place, and expect everything to go smoothly. Everything needs the context of strategy, which is driven by the context of value exchange and your organization and your whole mindset, all of the factors in mindset and so forth, which we've discussed in previous videos. But what this leadership and management model does is it separates out the responsibilities of the leaders, the CEO, say, and the managers, say the COO and the people who execute in that position. It asks the questions who, what, when, how, and why, in effect. The basic questions people always ask. Actually, I'll separate them and say that for the leader, it's the what, why, and when. And for the execution, it's who and how. Um, Very important. But those questions are driven by your definition of value exchange and the decisions you make in this particular instance about the implementation of the various forms of AI that you're going to use. Why? Why are you doing this? We've talked about some problems that happen when you don't think through the why. When? Is your time your friend or enemy? Are you going to rush to get something in place, or are you going to take the time to figure it out in terms of what's best for your organization? The who question gets to the resources. You can't execute if you don't have the right people in place, and so forth. The how is your organization structure. In a lot of age, and this is a little more at the advanced end of what we're talking about today, but if you're implementing a full AI agent architecture, your organizational structure is going to change. And what does that mean in terms of how you're going to execute your strategy? These are things you have to not only understand, but think through so that you can, it all comes down to deliver value and get the results you want. So I guess what I'm painting here, Tom, is a picture of the complex organization that most organizations are these days in the complex economic and business environment they all operate in, and how you have to work with your basics, your mindset, your understanding of value exchange, how you yourself prepare to do your job, how you answer these questions. What am I missing? How you pull together your vision, mission, and strategy. All of this is basic and it's basic pre-AI, but it becomes all that much more important once you're talking about implementing one of these emerging technologies because all of the decisions change. And I'll stop there and let you make some final points here.
So I'm going to come back to what what we're articulating here is things that we know most people that are watching this know internally.
Yes.
And this is more about reminding you that these are all available to you to be used when you're dealing with projects like this one problem of I now have to have a board meeting in February where we're going to talk about implementing the AI agent architecture in the more complex way of the use of AI, from not just using the automation, which we've been using, but moving it into reasoning and inference and some aspect of that. And are we ready? Are we ready for that? And what is it going to take to do that? And are we as a company ready, which was what you were were focusing on as CEO when you portrayed that position. And me to say, is the oversight ready? Because there is an alignment issue. If we don't have the oversight at the level of knowledge and capability of being able to understand the problem appropriately, or understand the execution appropriately, or understand the strategy appropriately, then we haven't done our job. I haven't done my job as board chair in
Yes.
giving you, the CEO, the proper oversight resources. So
Right.
these problems can become incredibly complicated. We don't mean to make them overly complex. We're describing to you how complex they actually are. And if you're dealing in situations where time is not your friend, and you don't have a lot of time, at least try the three basics. The three, what am I missing? What are the motivations of the people involved? And is it, how much time do I have to do this? But if you quickly evaluate you don't have a lot of time, then you've got to do what you've got to do. Hopefully, you've prepared yourself with a solid base. And secondly, that you developed through that the instincts by matching your fundamental knowledge with the experience and developing good instincts, because good instincts and judgment are the hallmark of really valuable human beings. And, one of the discussions you and I were having earlier this morning is where people, they let their instincts and they let their judgments get confused. And if they're not careful, they can have had a really good reputation and destroy it really quickly
Correct.
by not making sure that those things are fresh, right? They're sharp and edgy, and you still have, again, it has nothing to do with demographics or anything. It has to do with how well you maintain them. So that really our job here was to say, all right, look, um, there are times you don't have time. And so you have to be able to quickly make a decision. Hopefully you got that, the tools you can use to do that. When you have the time and you judge the risks to warrant this level of detail, what we're doing with this particular video is giving you insight into the way you can apply some of these tools, like the concept of value exchange, like the concept of these, what we call the organizational structure, which is the three questions married up against these decision questions. What resources do I have? What is the outcome I'm driving to? And then what's the plan? And then finally, what you and I consider to be the test of the organization, right? The alignment question for the organization itself, the vision, mission, strategy. Is this plan I'm putting together, does it align with our vision and our mission and our strategy, meaning our view of where we're going, our job to get there, and then our approach to the job? Is it aligning or is it conflicting? What's that telling me? Is that telling me I have a plan problem or I have a strategy problem, right? So but again, as one person was saying to me one time, well, you make this overly complicated. Yes, because I want you to have the resources available when you have the very high risk and you have the time. You need that knowledge of what you can do and not be left with just surface level capabilities.
We're thinking deeper in this video, and I think both of us would say, Tom, that the more complex your organization and your environment, the more critically important it is for you to think deeper, that the easy answers don't work anymore.
Yes.
You have
And
to
and
keep doing these analyses.
you do. And a lot of times there are people that waste time doing this because the risk involved is not great enough.
Right.
So you may have the time, but there's not enough risk involved. And there's not enough opportunity. Risk meaning take advantage of an opportunity or solve a really serious problem, right? So it's on both sides of the equation. But our point is, look, I don't care. I don't care if I'm going to give you the full book. I want you to have the full book because there's going to be time when you will want that full book of knowledge. Now,
Correct.
if you don't have it, most of you do, but if you don't, join us for the third series in this, where we'll go through each one of these tools, the radar screen, we'll go through the assessment questions, we'll go through the leadership responsibilities of the leader, we'll go through value exchange, we'll go through these decide questions, these organizational questions, and we'll go through the vision, mission, strategy. What is it? How do you create them? Um, One final point before I turn it over to you, Deirdre, to give us the final summing up here. You and I have come to think about the leadership responsibilities as being a personal test. It's like a
Mhm.
personal checklist, a leader's checklist. Am I
Correct.
meeting my personal responsibilities,
Correct.
right? When I'm looking at this problem of, I've got this problem, I've got to solve this problem, agentic AI architecture being introduced in the company, board, am I living up to my responsibilities when I'm dealing with this problem? And then there is, if you have the time, the company test.
Right.
Does it match my vision, mission, and strategy?
Correct.
And so we think of those two, we put those at the end because we think of those as two checklists that almost like a pilot has, not a way it's a way to remind yourself what your expectations are. It's something you check off to say, yep, I thought about that, or to remind you you haven't done it.
Right.
So I'm going to give you well, kind of the last words, but I'll let you sum up what we've done today in your way.
Well, this is the second of our making a decision video. Remember, and this is a note to our listeners, that we're doing these series that we call the board debate series. We've done two videos which present conversations between a board chair and a CEO. These making the decision videos, 2A and 2B, talk about how we got to the point where we could have these conversations. What thinking did we have to do? What tools did we have to do? We're going to be doing two, what we call 3A and 3B in this series. And this particular series is about deciding to use AI agents in a company. 3A and 3B is going to be an in-depth look at the particular tools that we've been talking about. We've talked about what, 6, 8 tools in the analyses for making a decision. We'll go into those in some depth so that you will gain confidence in using these tools to yourself, make decisions, and have board discussions. Now, all of these videos are and will be out on the Deep Business site on YouTube. So go out to YouTube, find the Deep Business Initiative, and you can watch the earlier videos in the series, as well as our, what are there, 60 other videos out there, Tom? A lot of videos out there covering a lot of topics, including our previous series, which was about dealing with uncertainty and change.
Yes.
We went through this whole analysis as well. I just wanted to remind people that we have these series of videos out there on our YouTube channel, which they can find and get information about topics which we hope are pertinent to their work.
Yes.
So,
And the 1 and 2 series are meant for the CEO, the sitting leader, um, uh, um, and or the senior leader. And then the series 3 is what we call the university videos, and they're to get into the details. And in there, we'll get into what is governance, what is a board's responsibility in going forward, not looking backwards, but looking forward. We'll get into those aspects. We'll go deeper on AI agents and the actual technology. But we're
perfect.
assuming everybody who's watching this has that background. They don't need us to be telling them those things.
Have the background, but could benefit from structures that we're putting in place to do the analyses and to think through various issues. So
As usual, it's always a pleasure.
always a pleasure, Tom.